Hi, I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger. After hard work, laboring and slaving away, I finally have achieved my lifelong dream. And it is not to do Terminator or to do Conan the Barbarian or anything like that. No, not at all. But to finally possess my own f***ing tank. Look at this.
So you want to own a tank? Yes, I do. Who would not want to own a tank? Why would you need a tank? Why wouldn't you need a tank? Because it's a tank. What does it take to own a tank here in the US? Ironically, nothing. You can just buy a tank. Tanks are legal to own in the USA and other countries. There are no, I repeat, there are no US federal restrictions to owning a tank with a demilitarized or disabled main gun. You may operate it on private land without restrictions. Yes. If you can own a tractor, you can own a tank. Further research into this shows me that the destructive device category falls into local laws. So there are now some counties and even states that are Second Amendment sanctuaries, which means you go there to buy your fully active tank, and it's 100% legal. You get a tank, and you get a tank, and you get a tank. The entire crowd gets a tank. The M4 Sherman tank. The engine in this, it was a 9-cylinder radial engine that's used on airplanes. So whenever you say your airplane flies like a tank, I mean, it literally does. This was the most widely produced tank of World War II. Over 50,000 of these things were made between 1942 and 1957. It had a sweet 75mm gun, or a 3-inch gun, or a 105mm howitzer. The same gun that's on that C-130 gunship. Yes! And it had some smaller plinkers on top, either some 30mm or 50 cals. Some of these even had flamethrowers mounted to it, coming in at a featherweight 68,000 pounds. With a top speed of 26 miles an hour. That is a piece of history. Very, very cool. This is when you can say built like a Cadillac and it meant something. That heavy, sturdy, chunky kind of a car. This is a 1944 to 1953 M24. And yes, these were made by Cadillac and Massey Harris. They made just under 5,000 of these. At the end of the Second World War, to take the place of that M4 we were looking at, slap that 75mm howitzer on here. Some of the other variants had some T-65 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 105mm howitzers, 6 50 cal machine guns. That's serious. That's just cool to hear that. There's about 25 different countries use this thing throughout the years. 40,500 pounds is how much this one tips the scales at. They use not one, but 2 Cadillac engines, producing 220 horsepowers. Had a 8-speed hydromatic transmission. Maximum speed 35 miles an hour. And it got 1 gallon per mile in fuel economy. Found this one right here. The guy's asking $339,000 for it. It is 100% ready to go. Maybe drive this through Portland. Probably the safest vehicle you can drive through Portland now. Probably the only vehicle you can drive through Portland now. This is just evil on wheels and tracks and should be inside of a volcano. Any dictator, tyrant, or authoritarian worth his salt would have one of these things. It was used by Nazi Germany, Romania, Hungary, Italian Social Republic, hello Mussolini, even the French. We'll give them that one. Built from 39 to 45, Sonderkraftwagen 251 is a World War II German armored personnel carrier by the Hanomag Company. Yeah, it's not a tank, but look at that thing, dude. It's just freaking... If I saw this thing running down the road, I'd be like, nope, I'm gone. Gives me the chills just looking at it. It's awesome. And the engine is a Maybach 6-cylinder, 99 horsepowers. Wow. It'll go all the way up to 32 miles an hour. These things had 75 millimeter cannons. They had 50 millimeter cannons, 37 millimeter anti-tank guns, flamethrowers. It's also found in lots of video games like Call of Duty. Well, that's an interesting fact. Whenever Germany was short on the petrol, they had wood-fueled half-tracks. That's cool. We found one here for just 40,000 euro, just outside of Munich. That's exactly where you would expect to find one of these. This was a couple years ago. However, you do see them come up for sale every once in a while. They're pretty popular, and I can see why.
Средний танк Т-54. Боевая масса 36 тонн. Экипаж 4 человека. Оружие – пушка калибра 100 мм, 2 пулемета калибра 7,62 мм и 1 зенитный пулемет калибра 12,7 мм. Мощность дизельного двигателя – 520 лошадиных сил. Максимальная скорость – 50 км в час.
We got this Russian T-54 main battle tank. The T-54 was first put into service in 1947. Fun fact, it is still being used today. They were produced in Soviet Union, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. And we don't really know how many were made. We're guessing north of 100,000 of these tanks were made. So you might be walking through the woods and just stub your toe on one. The main armament was a 100 millimeter rifled gun, make that little thing spin. And then you had some 7.62s around it. Another V12 diesel producing 500 horse, or a kicked up version, the AMG model, 800 BTUs. This thing will top out at a whopping 31.6 miles an hour. Yeah, it's the same thing with everybody that's under 6 foot tall. They always had that, I am 5'7" and 1/2. That's cool. There was one that was fitted with a MiG-21 engine that would blow water over a fire, and they called it the Hurricane. You have a tank and a MiG-21. How cool is that? Here we have the Centurion AVRE for 170,000 pounds. This is legit. It's got a bulldozer blade on the front of it. It was in a TV show. AVRE stands for Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers. V12, and you guessed it, it's a souvenir from the first Gulf War in '91. Developed to breach fortification and clearing man-made anti-tank traps for the British Army. Came into service in '63, replacing the Churchill AVRE, and it's got a short and stubby but fat 165 millimeter main gun. The front also had a cradle on it, so it could carry pipes that it would drop in the ditches, so the vehicles coming behind it would be able to drive across. Fun fact, that's pretty neat. It's got a blistering 21 mile an hour top speed at a featherweight 52 tons. Whew, that is a chunk of metal. Love it. The Abbot FV433 for 47,000 pounds. You may have seen this one driving around London. He uses it all the time. The FV433 has a 105mm cannon, and it's specifically called a self-propelled gun. I want a self-propelled gun. It was nicknamed the Abbot. Make sure you didn't confuse it with the howitzer, because this one was an L109 and the howitzer was the M109. Put into service in 1965, and they are still using them today. Comes in at 16.5 tons. She's got 240 BTUs under the hood and get you up to 29 miles an hour. This 105mm cannon can shoot 8 rounds a minute. That's throwing some lead downrange. What? This thing was kind of amphibious. It had a flotation screen fixed around the hull to provide buoyancy, and the tracks would get it through the water at 3 knots. That's cool. This is a pretty cool piece of kit. Who wouldn't want to run things over with a tank? That's all I would do. I would just go around finding things to run over. The Russians are kinda like the global rednecks. I've got to admit, sometimes I am a little jealous of the Russians. I mean, they've got all this land that they can just go out and have fun in. Now, this T-72 has been labeled the most destroyed tank of the 21st century. Yeah, and sometimes it catches fire whenever they try to, shoot things. And yes, any place where there's some questionable political battles going on, you'll probably find this tank. Still, it's a flippin' tank. Now, coming from the ever trustworthy Russian Ministry of Defense, because anytime a government releases news, it is undeniably and unquestionably the most authoritative source on fact and not in any way propaganda. They say that they have updated the T-72 tank to be like a submarine. Okay, basically they just took some PVC pipes and stuck it on the inlet and the outlet here and drove it underwater and gave the guys a couple of oxygen masks. They also say they have updated the T-72B3 in 2016 with a powerful new engine, automatic transmission, and digital display. So they gave them an iPad with Google Maps. About 20,000 of these have been made, exported to about 40 countries around the world. And now you can own one! Here are some honorable mentions. The Mark 10 Chieftain, the Soviet Tu-S3 Akatsiya, the Warthog, Doomsday Grizzly bug-out vehicle, Cayman armored personnel carrier. Let's face it, we all know that men never mature beyond the age of 9. This is the coolest 9-year-old toy on the planet. Here's the recipe for magic. You take a big, gigantic track vehicle, you throw a huge gun on it, and then you run stuff over. That is the perfect vehicle. This is like a real-life video game. Oh yes, I could tell you all those fancy statistics, like it's got a 120mm main cannon, came into service in 1965, has a top speed of 65 kilometers per hour, but nobody wants to hear that stuff. We just want to run stuff over and drive a flippin' tank. There you go. There are some tanks that you as a civilian can own, drive, operate, even on the road. My name is Jimmy. This is Jimmy's World. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.